All right, so welcome back. Now we're going to start in on a long pose, a head study long pose. So I've got the image up, and then I've got the technique we're going to be working with is on blue tone paper. And we've seen this paper before, but now we're going to use a additive subtractive charcoal technique. So I've got the paper, you can see me working there, and then I've got the compressed charcoal and just gently rubbing down on the texture to get some down there, kind of relatively haphazardly, I suppose. And then I'm going to take obviously the chamois here and then begin to blend that into that textured paper. This Canson Mi Tientes paper and charcoal material today we're going to use. And then I'll use charcoal pencils and some white chalk, pastel chalk for the final push on the features of the highlights in some of the lighter form areas. And then I'm going to erase a little bit with Japanese mono, actually a lot of Japanese mono erasers, and then also use an electric eraser to get out some of those really fine details in the eye, reflections on the nose, and then go back with white chalk on those. So sit back, this is a long version of that, so you can watch as you want, or you can fast forward through it and do what you want. But here you can see I can kind of just brush that down and smooth that out a little bit so we can get the tone we want for the drawing to get started here. So obviously got the image on the left there, and you can see that just kind of going back and kind of squaring that off a little bit. And then at the end of the video, I'll have the drawing, and then also have the image of this lovely young woman, and you guys can work with her as a printed image if you want, or you can use it as the video goes along. And again, it's from Croquis Cafe, which is a wonderful source. Please use them and donate to them. I don't get any monetary kickback from them. It's all just wonderful word-of-mouth reference because they do such a nice job. All right, so laying in the head structure. You know, she's on a tilt, and we're going to obviously keep it on tilt. And I include a little bit of the hair and the head with the lay-in. It's going a little bit faster technique. You can keep both of those moving and analyzed as you're working through. And you're going to see me as the drawing goes through start to block in with, or lay in the shadow shapes and then block in with the kneaded eraser and erasers, and then start to lay in core shadow and build up the drawing to a focused finish, and then correct a few errors, especially on the cheek on the right side of the image where her hand is. I make that a little bit too narrow and gets that off. And then actually, if I want to make the video even longer, I feel like the left eye that I drew in the image is probably just a tad low. But again, this is where it doesn't bother me, and when the image goes away, it doesn't really matter. But I might, for my own personal practice, I might have redrawn that just a little bit, but I don't, just for the sake of time. But I certainly, you can judge for yourself if it's just a little bit low. I certainly think it is, but it doesn't. Again, this is where the artist makes a decision based off aesthetic knowledge. Is it bothersome? If it's not, then you just leave it. If it's grotesquely off, then you certainly want to leave it. So blocking in, laying in, drawing in the gesture of the head, finding the center line of the eyes, roughly the center line of the head as she's tilted to the left, and just getting in the features, neck coming through here now, tube-like gesture for the neck on that toned charcoal paper. Shoulder coming across and then downward. There's a nice, elegant pose here. Looking slightly up. Our viewpoint is about eye level of her chin. Maybe the lips, but certainly we're looking just slightly up from her at that point in time. So we'll go from a very gestural lay-in, and we'll start to tighten this up over time. In about 3.5 hours, we'll have, finished head study. That's, again, a sketch. If you wanted to go for something that's photo real, that's not really the point of these drawings. So make sure that all these long-term poses, we don't really in class time at the university here, we don't really have time for photorealism. Photorealism it's drawing, sure, if you're drawing or painting, but it is certainly a different approach where you make the image as real to, or obey the photograph is concretely and as thoroughly as you can. That's not necessarily what we're doing here. We're interpreting, analyzing, and then letting the drawing be a drawing. Let it be a little looser and sketchier in areas where you want it to be. You'll see how I tighten up the head drawing, especially in the head, the features, but there's still a mark-making approach, which I really like as a draftsman and as an artist, and you really get that from Rubens, and I get it from Rembrandt, get a little bit from Tiepolo and others who I admire their drawings as much as I do, if not even more so than the technique of their paintings. So it winds up having a kind of Renaissance or Baroque look in general, but the stylings that we do nowadays, and also the look of our drawings are a little different, and also fashion changes as well, but the materials are roughly about the same as well. All right, so just giving you some background on where I'm coming from with all of that, but we're not, I see, on YouTube, and this is really not really for my students, it's more about for my YouTube land students, is that if you get enamored by photorealism, I think that's great, but that's a different approach, and quite frankly, sometimes it's not the end-all be-all. I'd be careful if that's the only thing that you're going for. I think that's okay too. Everybody has their own ending game through that. So you can see I'm just gesturing through, finding where I want to find the forms. I'll say that, again, letting a drawing be a drawing, letting it have a sketchier quality at times can be really liberating and refreshing, and we have an entire art movement of Impressionism that gives us that idea to allow that to happen, that brushier simplification, which I happen to like too, just for academic, traditional kind of work. John Singer Sargent is a good one to look at and to think about too. But even if you can go as far back as Velázquez, looking at Diego Velázquez's portrait painting, it's really liberating this kind of blurred, sort of shiny brushstroke that he gets, that was part of his particular genius of the craft of his humanity in his artwork. So notice I'm including the basic form of the hair and the head together, and just getting a simple gestural quality to that. I think I'm using a medium charcoal pencil, which I use quite a bit for layin, and I go to soft, extra soft, and then all the way to big compressed charcoal sticks, and then on to chalk as well. So hopefully in these long-term poses, I'll give you more insight as to the way I'm thinking and also drawing, and then what I like and what I don't like about what I'm doing, because we all have that, and then not being hopefully afraid to make changes when you want, and then live with maybe little things that are a little different than the image or the photo. That's kind of in one way why I like so much to work from life, is the model gets up and you're done, and you're not quite so hardcore enamored to or in love or attached. That's the better word. Attached to the photograph as well, and I think that gets to be a problem in drawing training. With these online kind of things and technology, you see that happening more and more. I think it's fine, but if you're out there and you're a younger student especially, or young at heart, and you have the means or the ambition to get in front of live models, the more you can get in front of live models, the better. And they walk up and they move and they change a little bit. So your drawing is an interpretation, and the closer you can get to their reality through those sessions, the better. But we don't necessarily behold someone to, complete total, down to the millimeter pixel kind of accuracy that we might do with some of these. And so I get a little, I wouldn't say discouraged, but I get a little, I wouldn't even say frustrated, but I notice that, some people are wedded to photographs, and it looks quite frankly, it looks a little deadened when it looks just like a photograph. I would say for these academic drawings, even the kind of the tightening, they get to be so tight they sometimes lose a little bit of the humanity or the flavor of the spirit sometimes of the drawing, and letting the materials be the materials. So that's why we involve our students in the study of art history, in the knowledge of art history and aesthetics and theories of art that talk about and engage the mind into these aesthetic ideas. And so we're making, drawings. The history of photography really changed art in the middle of the 19th and late 19th century, and we moved away from more strict observation because we could get that with a camera. And so artists were freed up to, for instance, to go into abstraction and cubism, and we could go into modernism and Dada and collage, and we had Picasso and etc. And this opened us up to some artistically, different stylistic ways of thinking that still resound and reverberate today as we still work through the training of traditional drawing and painting. You could stay there, or you could move on and learn this craft and say, okay, what is there beyond the traditional aspects, and move into that, or you can stay there for a lifetime and work as a more traditional artist. And then what can you do with the given amount of time that you have to make it yours? So you can see where the lay-in now of the head drawing, I know I'm going off on tangents, but it's important, is a partial lay-in of shadow shape and also structure. So there's neither one that I've demoed in the figure section here on the drawing database is completely one or the other. It's a mix of, and that's what's important about these longer term poses, is I can go deeper into some of the thinking. So I'm shorthanding, I'm getting there faster, and I can combine gesture, which I'm doing and done, and then volume, which I'm doing and thinking about structure. But I'm also getting into the volume and value lay-in, a linear lay-in, and I'll get into block-in here in a moment, in shorthanding that, because block-in, if you get the shapes right, can be structural as well as the thinking of volumes in solids, or the volumetric figure, which is going on. So all that's going on. Horizontal, vertical alignment is going on, scale and proportion. You can see where I make changes on the fly in alter, and you can see where right now I would say the right cheekbone, cheek area on the image, that would actually be her left, but her right one on the image is sunken in a little too far, and I really don't pick it up until a little bit later, and I make that adjustment. And you'll see where the left eye in the image that I draw compared to what she has is a little bit lower than everything else, but it's not so low that it doesn't bother me. But I do notice, and I debated whether or not, again, I'd make that. So I won't change all my errors sometimes. You're going to make errors with every single work, and if you have long periods of time where you're making your work for yourself and you're not videoing them and it's diagrammatic and you're not narrating them, you want to go ahead and make those changes. So if this drawing was going to be for something that I would show, I would change that, the left eye, this one I'm drawing now, and probably raise it just a little bit. I've got it tilted down a little bit more than what the head structure would call for. But again, not enough to be so bothersome that when the image slides away and all we have left is the drawing, could you live with? So you can tell where I've got the eyebrow, and it's a little bit lower, even a little bit wide, quite frankly, and I think I moved that over in a little while. So that's something to think about. So you can see where I'm drawing these sockets, getting the feel for the structure of the socket, the eye socket around the eyeball. And it's just slightly a little bit lower than, again, what I'm analyzing through there. And so I'm, again, combining the gesture, the volume, and the lay-in, which ultimately will be a block-in with light and value. And so she gets leaned over a little bit further with this eye than I want. Don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid if you can pick it up early. be afraid to change it to as well. So laying in the eye, getting through the hair here, and just picking apart the major shadow shapes. This is also a good. I get a lot of suggestions for hair demos, and this is kind of, I'll probably do a video on that proper, and I'll do different hairstyles and focus on the quality of the hair. And, you know, as we go deeper, I'll talk more about it, but if you can simplify hair into mass shapes of value, light value edges, and contrast and form, as opposed to trying to draw every single strand, you'll be much, much happier. Unless, again, that's where photorealism changes or differs from what we do in drawing or sketching and what I call this kind of traditional or Renaissance-esque, you know, atelier or approach, art school kind of approach, is to get really these are about getting the handle on good structural drawing, and then whatever you do with it later on, you're on your own, and you have the full right to be a creative artist and as dynamic as you want to be. So again, if it was a photo real kind of thing, you would ultimately not bog down, but get yourself steeled for the fact that you're going to be rendering lots of tiny little follicles of hair where there's maybe some split ends there, which we all have, and you get all of that here. That would not be the case at all for the drawing. So again, you can see where the eyes are tilted a little bit, again, more than what the model gives us. So even laying them in now in the drawing, it looks okay. It looks fine. It just that left eye is lower than what ultimately the image is giving us. And so I'm going to raise it up a little later, and I'm going to change that cheekbone that I'm just drawing now ultimately later on, because that was more troublesome. You'll find through this longer session, much longer session. So getting in shadow shape, it's good to see this all the way through. I think it's very important. Hopefully you're getting an appreciation for hopefully the opportunity to see such, you know, inside the craft of kind of traditional drawing, both good and corrective as well. And so, and you understand that even professionals, and I've been drawing since I was 5, and I'm 50. I just turned 50, so 45 years. We make mistakes all the time. We correct them pretty fast, and we can see them, and we have our own tendencies of corrections to make. So I take heart when I see maybe a Rubens drawing or a Tiepolo or Caravaggio or whoever with some obvious mistakes on them, and I take heart and say, well, if they can, are allowed to make mistakes, and certainly then I can too. We all have the right to make them. So. Working in the philtrum now, filling in the lips here. Feeling in the fleshy parts of the lip, gesturing that in. It's good to get all that laid in, even if you've got some errors. And you can see what I've done in the nose, where I've not even drawn all the nose, but I've blocked in the shadow shape in some of the structure too. So there's a method to that. The right side of the face is more in shadow, so I've made the shadow shapes. I've gestured in some of the eyes, and you're going to see this get to a much, much tighter point to the drawing. I think what I'll do actually is I'll go ahead and pop up soon a finished photo of the image and have that down to one side so we can see where the rough start is and where we get to a finish. That might be really a good way to approach it too. So let me do that. Let's go ahead and get that popped up here soon. All right, there it goes. It appears, so you can see where the ending, the complete finish, and where I've made changes occurs, and then what I've got here. So I'll keep this up the entire time. I think that'll be instructive as a sketch. And you see there are changes that I make from many different ways. Like, you know, the drawing that I'm making now, the stage that it's in, which is a gesture lay-in stage, and then also the interpretation of what the model's giving me over to the right, which is a little bit different too. It's not completely exact, and quite frankly, unless I'm trying to go for photorealism, I'm going to live with little changes alterations that I just make as an artist, and you can judge for yourself if you like them as well. So, in looking at her left eye again, I think it's still a little bit low. If I wanted to pursue that further, that's probably the only thing I would change about this particular drawing. But I think that that's instructive in that we don't always get it right, and sometimes it's really okay. And the more expressive you get, the more abstract all those areas get in the first place too as well. So I take heart in that, and I hope there's a lesson in that for you about trying to be too exacting, and sometimes you lose the spirit of the drawing. So, you know, I think we can all say that that's a portrait of this particular model, but that there's not a photoreal quality of which is not the point of that. That might take 60, 70 hours of rendering time to do that, and that's obviously not going to be in a video. So in your own drawing practice, as you're learning the craft of drawing, for my students and then for my YouTube land students, if you will, take heart for that, and you want to get a good likeness of your model, but I don't know that a photoreal likeness in sketching is to the point of that. So I hope that is a clear kind of an idea for you a little bit. So if not, email me, and if I get a chance, I'll try to respond to. I get a lot of emails. Some I can get to, some are so complex, and I'm so busy that I just cannot. I apologize if you people in YouTube land, all my students I have to get back to, and I will, because they're our students and are paying. But if you're out in YouTube land and you email me and I don't get back, it's not because I don't care, and I don't mean to. Sometimes I just miss it, and or I'm just so busy. I apologize up front if that has been the case with you, or if it does happen to you. I certainly apologize to that as well. So just getting in the fingers, I keep the fingers fairly gestural and a little bit looser throughout the entire sketch, and you can see the finish. The finish will be, there's even a little bit more that's going on with it, even off camera, and I'll include it at the end of this video so you can study it and analyze it for whatever you want, good, bad, or indifferent, and take a read on it and use it in your own study. But I would say, technically these within the wheelhouse of more Renaissance type drawing, where there's not as much blending or stumping or smudging, and it's more just direct charcoal and tone. Albert Dürer-esque maybe a little, certainly with the contouring marks, which are a kind of a hallmark of more traditional drawing practice. So again, laying some of the structure of the fingers, blocking in the shadow shapes along with them, or laying them in. And of course, we're about to mop in with the kneaded erasers soon enough here to get to the first initial, full good pass of separating light and dark, which will really give this drawing its first big bump in volume and change. So can you see the cheekbone on the right? See how it sinks in too deep? To me, that's the big issue more than anything else, and I really don't correct it until later. Sometimes you don't see your errors, or you see things you want to change until you get away from it. And that's important, is to stand back. That's probably what I don't get by making videos. I don't get a chance to stand back as much. All right, so now I've moved on, and now we're ready to take our erasers, our different set of erasers, our kneaded eraser, the gummy eraser, and I use the Japanese Moto erasers for the hard edge. And we're going to start painting in a way with drawing. So I'm going to start in the hair here and just begin to lift off the toned charcoal from the chamois and the compressed charcoal to get it to lift here and come off so we can get separation now between our lights and darks. And for those of you, again, that are interested in hair and have sent me emails or suggestions to the community section, this is a good place to look at one hair study that's fairly lengthy in time and also in terms of one approach to it. You notice that the instructional things that I do for both our students here at NKU and also for YouTube land people is there's no how-to guide. These are concept approaches to more traditional drawing, and these can get very idiosyncratic, and especially when you get to advanced levels. And then we kind of open it up to say, what do you have? And then let's analyze if it's working or not. So this how-to approach is dubious. I would be careful of all the videos out there, even good artists I see out there that have YouTube stuff, that this how-to ideas is more about an approach to or one possible way to. And so that's what I proffer as opposed to saying this is the only way to do that, because the history of art is filled with various different approaches to problem solving visually in terms of structure and style or whatnot. So as I begin to erase, I'm not going for every single hair strand ever in a drawing. I'm going for the mass approach to the hair, to the design, to the rhythm, to the shape, to the form of the hair. And right now it's blocking from light into dark. It's only in those final passes of the drawing, for instance, in the final moments of a drawing, I might get into hair that is off of the structure of the head like a shell, or the outline that gets into little wispy bits and pieces and marks. That comes very last. If you get that early, you're going to be disappointed probably in the drawing of the hair. So you want to start out from very general to get to very specific and keep it more of a mass as an approach rather than a literal approach to drawing every single follicle. I think you'll be very disappointed in what that looks like. And especially with curlier hair, the curlier rhythmic it is, the more students have problems because they want to draw every curl or greatly simplify it and draw the hair with just kind of pigtail marks, as opposed to really looking and seeing the rhythm of there. If you go back and look at Renaissance drawing, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Rubens especially, Hans Holbein drawings, Dürer, the hair is an abstract series of curls and marks. You're not drawing every single hair. It's about depth and layering and an approach to the problem of mass and mass gesture, and then getting the light value and the edges and the contrasts to really match up to make that a significantly finished whole of a sketch. And that takes, for you, dear student, or the student here, is to do your homework. All of you, my students, YouTube land students, is to be able to talk about different approaches to drawing through art history, and primarily the drawing database is more Renaissance and Baroque techniques, because when we start getting into, and also I suppose Impressionism, but when we get into modernism and postmodernism, it's so idiosyncratic that it becomes much more difficult to teach. And so my tastes run the entire gamut of art history. I'm as excited about looking at a Caravaggio a painting in a Velázquez as I am a Lucian Freud or Hockney or somebody like Dana Schutz maybe, or some of the biggest names in the art world in terms of their Lucian Freud, for instance, or Franz Klein, or Kandinsky. What I'm looking for is hallmarks of art historical groundbreaking breakthroughs, and even things I don't necessarily like. I at least want to talk about and explore the idea of why you don't like something. I think that's important too. So I'm getting into a little philosophy as we're drawing, so I can eat up some of the time it takes to look at all this. Hopefully, if that's enjoyable, great. If not, apologies or get over it. Blocking in the forehead, and it's very painterly. I'm trying as best I can to feel the contours of the cranial structure of the forehead. You can do this in oil technique of thin down turpentine laid on a canvas, and then come back with a little turp in the brush and a paper towel or a rag, and wipe away the oil where you've drawn, and this will give you the same approach in painting. So we're just trying to feel the contours and trying to feel the block in between what we're doing and where we're going, and then what we're working from. That's really what we see in front of us. To the left is what we're working from, how we're interpreting that. It's not a copy. We're not trying to be 100% exact. We try to get as close as we can, but she doesn't have charcoal contour marks across her cheekbones or her nose, or the suppleness of her lips don't have chalk marks, etc. We're creating those. She's giving us the wonderment of her physical form and the beauty of her pose, and what we're doing is we're interpreting that through various drawing techniques to get at something that we create from that observation. So she is the source of information, and then the drawing that I'm making now is the process to put all these processes together and kind of speed it up, and then ultimately what we come up with is what is essentially located on the top right there in the corner, is the final product, and we could judge based off of our success. Are we in the ballpark? Does it look like her? Does it look like Bart Simpson? If it looks like Bart Simpson, or if it looks like, heaven forbid, Donald Trump, we're in a lot of particular trouble. But I think I've been well in the ballpark of her features. Am I 100% accurate? No, I don't think I've ever been 100% accurate, but that's what makes it probably even better than a photo rendering. So if you like photorealism, you're probably gonna move on, and I say good luck to you. I think that's great too. So one thing we want to get to early here is to don't forget about the negative space or the background of our drawing. We want to engage with that early on. If we're doing full figure, half figure, in this case a head drawing or portraiture, if you will, and get confident early with what's going on tonally with the background or the setup, because that helps with the drawing. And notice I change mine. I add more variety to the kind of grayish, sort of slightly reddish grayish tonality that's in the background. That's fairly flat, and I add a little bit of, number one, mark making, but a little change in some of the value. You see the finished drawing, the top left corner and the bottom left, just to make it an interpretation. We could change that. You could change that dramatically. You could make it much more of a darker photograph. You could put her behind wallpaper. Put her outside. There's so many different variations for that. So Courbet is one. Courbet is one of my favorite portraitists as well. If you don't know his work, look him up. Courbet, Courbet, and he was notorious for doing indoor studies, portraits, and then putting them outdoors. And you could see the difference in the lighting. The lighting was made up and more artificial, but it had a certain art historical resonance to that, and that made it worked. And then, of course, the plain artist painters of the Impressionists came along, and that became and Russians as well, and that became a break from that studio practice of bringing the indoors bringing the outdoors in without studying painting from the outdoors, and also bringing the indoor models outdoors. And so they all were mixed together. And if you look at Leonardo's paintings or Titian, or you look at, again, Courbet, and you can tell that. Then go and take a look at the Impressionists, Monet's earlier figurative works, even Manet, Pissarro, and certainly others, Degas even, and you can tell the interaction of studied light and the figure in light as well. So, and you can judge whether or not, even Renoir to a degree, and you can judge whether or not that works for your aesthetic, or if you like that, and you can have an opinion to that as well. Much of Renaissance outdoor painting was not a direct, complete, a scientific or color study of what nature actually did, and until we got to the Impressionist era of art making, and that's why the colors change quite a bit. So you can see where I've got the head tilt, the eyes a little bit lower, but it still works here. I'm gonna raise it up just a little bit, probably, and then narrow it just a little bit to as well. So I think, the difference spatially where the eye is to the bottom of the nose is going to would have needed to be raised further, but it gives a head tilt, and it curves the head around even further. So rhythmically it works. Structurally it's a little off, and it will stay that way throughout to the final drawing. So I hope one part of these videos is also to show a professional. I've been drawing for forever, and show my professional work all over the country, and it's very different than the figurative work that you see here. So the versatility of an artist can be something you can profess, because we kind of have to as a professor. You have to know quite a bit about more than what you do, but also the ability to show mistakes that we make in the process of more mature diagrams, or in these case demos, that it happens to everybody. And if you're a student of art history, which I encourage you all to be, is to look at the craft of the major artists that came before you and through the history of art, and look at their evolution, their training. Would take Picasso, for example. I've seen earlier when he was in his teens and early 20s, and there are quite a bit of mistakes that he still made as he was moving on to originality and brilliance, and becoming one of the dominant artists, if not the dominant artist of the 20th century. But we see the mistakes along the way. I've seen mistakes in Michelangelo drawings, Rubens drawings. I had professors talk about Rubens drawings and how awful he could be at times, and then how just virtuoso that he could be as well. So. So again, we're talking about the craft of drawing, blocking in the facial structure. And you can see it start to emerge, the shadow pattern between the light and in the dark. And you get a structural pattern of all this. And it reveals the structural parts of, in this case, the cranium, and the structure of the sub parts of the eyes and the nose and the mouth, etc. And there are times I like drawing like this. There are times I like drawing a little bit more volumetrically as well. For me, I feel like I have a little bit more command and craft when they're like that, just for my own, when I try to draw the figure as opposed to starting out with more tonal blocking. But we have these different approaches to long post drawings, so we want to see all that. And additive subtractive is a great way to get there. And just feeling all the different flow of the chin as it moves across the form, as it protrudes out from the lower jaw, the mandible there in the cheek. We get that nice separation of light and dark, don't we? It's a middle tone value. It's a middle tone lighter value. So the value of light is probably a 4, and the middle tone value is probably a 6. So there's not a maybe 3 and 6. So there's not a grand or great degree of contrast, but enough to start to give us our basic separation of all these forms as they're working collectively in space and become a great challenge to manipulate and master and get at something that works pretty well. Getting the neck, moving across that cylinder of the neck to find those shadow shapes as well as the light shapes. So, again, the light shapes are helping to define the shadow shapes, and vice versa. They double define. So again, if we drew on dark paper, we would be doing just the opposite. We would be drawing with the light, and so I think that's important to note. So a few more minutes here, and we'll finish up the entire block-in or mop-in stage, and we'll get on to the core shadow, and then beginning to tighten up this drawing and get it cleaner and clear and resolved. So again, these drawing processes, long-term drawings, really help us see how drawing in this particular manner for traditional drawing is very much a practice of working from very generalized ideas about space and form and space and line and value and contrast, and then getting into specifics of the figure. So from very general to very, very, very specific, which is what we're going for here, to give you a very organized approach to the figure and the model. This stage of the ball game is very, very much about being organized and getting your brain to see all the parts working at different stages that you need so it can all work together. And that was probably the biggest thing that I learned. One of the biggest things I learned in art school was to be organized in my thinking. And it takes a while because your brain wants to jump around to the most contrasty area. Like, for instance, maybe the glitter, the glitz on the eye, and we don't get to that until the last part, or the eyeball, or the nose, or maybe the gauged earring on the lower left, and the highlight on that. And that's something we don't really get to into the end. So it's, in some ways, I tell my students, it's kind of like you delay gratification of some of those areas, or you be careful not to jigsaw puzzle your drawing, and meaning that you don't work all over the place, but yet rather you work it systematically as a process. And that's what we're trying to do here, and that's what I was taught and learned to do, and that really boiled down to our interpretation through our professors through Renaissance techniques. Obviously, we couldn't study with Rubens or Titian because they just aren't around anymore, but we can, through the years, hand down this information, pass it down, and then certainly have it and then reinterpret it in the 20th and now the 21st century, where it remains vital, and then you can do with it what you want in terms of your creative practice. So just getting a feel for the negative space on the outsides, you can see where I get from and now where I go to at the ending drawing up there at the top, and then we'll move through these hands and fingers as well. So working around the hand to trap the hand as a shape, and then we'll jump into those fingers. Think of them as cylinders and as boxes, as three-dimensional, and then when I'm thinking about shape, I just think of them as a two-dimensional, kind of a crooked L shape with a long part and then coming down the shaft of that as a shape down the lower part. So I'm combining 2D and three-dimensional processes in my mind. And that's what we try to get across to our students, is you're going to combine both of those into works here, processes here. And then later on I'll show you how easily you can go back and correct mistakes. That's probably, again, that's one of the most vital things and livable things about charcoal, is it's so correctable for such a long time. Pastel is certainly the same way. Graphite gets more difficult. Colored pencil gets more difficult. Ink almost becomes impossible, and it's a material you might learn to live just with fresh mistakes that actually make the drawing more lively than if it was not. In charcoal, certainly one of those, it's such an accessible material because it's so cheap and it's ubiquitous and it's so versatile. But the problems that come with it is because it's so versatile, it can become hard to control without some time, some mentoring and some help, and then quite frankly experience too as well. All of those things have a way into making the craft of drawing a difficult proposition, but one that can be mastered over time. And then feeling the outside part of the palm of the hand, that turn of a cylinder. Almost completed now the block in stage. Mop in and block in the general big, large pass of shapes, thinking flat and three-dimensionally both, and getting a two-step drawing, a lighter side and a darker side to the drawing. And we've seen that through the figure section. I've demoed that and then added the coarse shadow. So we're moving on in this approach to getting to putting it all together and more finished sketch. Yep, and there we go. Now we're moving on to additive parts to the drawing, meaning we're going to go back to now drawing in charcoal. Remember, when you're using an eraser, you're still drawing. You're just lifting. It's a subtractive type of drawing, and when you're drawing with charcoal, it's just additive. Really, the only time you're erasing is you're taking off or adjusting is certainly with the chamois. All right, so now I'm beginning to block in with more darker tone here and adding generally coarse shadowed areas or darker shadowed areas of the composition. And generally when I'm doing an academic type demo, I'll just start from top to bottom, from the hair and the head. You know, I see a lot of students, they'll kind of piecemeal the drawing or work around and sort of jigsaw puzzling in different areas. But if you can think of it and keep your discipline and work pretty systematically from top to bottom, a lot of times you'll just create an easier time with all this complexity that you have to deal with, and then you have a better chance of making a competent and cleaner, crystal clear kind of drawing, even if it's even more loose or expressive, or just more of a sketch like we're doing here. So again, I get a lot of comments about hair, so this is kind of a de facto demo now on hair. This one, in the next long pose, I'll do male figure. You'll see me go through quite a bit of hair on that pose, and then actually get too much of it where I've got to take it back and change it. And I'll make some corrections on this drawing too in the head. I've got her tilted a little bit more. I'm going to raise, and her left eye is a little bit lower in my drawing, and I'm going to raise it up, and I'm also going to correct her cheek on the right side, cheek and jaw. It's a little bit long. So again, I'll say this: when you're drawing, my setup is a little more difficult because I'm photographing or videoing, and so the drawing is actually flat. If I was just drawing for myself, I would angle it about 30 to 45 degrees, and I find that it helps with any kind of perceptual mistakes that you might make. So I've got to do a little extra work, and I find that I need to make more corrections than maybe I normally would. But anyway, neither here nor there. So again, notice I'm just blocking in the hair. I'm taking account of where the darker values are in relationship to the drawing that I've already created, mid-tone of the chamois surface in the paper. And so anything darker than that, I'm going to start working in dark and then move to the middle. And then ultimately, if you look at the little image, the finish to the top right, and of course there'll be areas where I go lighter too as well with the white charcoal, or even lighten up with the eraser, but I generally don't get to those more so until the latter part of the drawing. So going for the ear lobe and the gauged earlobe in the lobe, that stretched ear lobe, I'm thinking. Just laying in the darker tones there, getting that cylinder kind of coin shape part of the earlobe with the ring or the gauge in that. It's very much like a disc, a rounded disc, like a bottle top or a coin, and with the inserted disc of the gauge into there as well. So it's a pretty, fairly early stage of the drawing with the block in, but you can see it all together, quite frankly. I can tell where, going back especially in narrating the video now as I'm doing this for educational purposes, I can see where the mistakes that I want to correct. I may not have seen them when I'm doing the drawing, caught them until later, but ultimately the head is tilted. I tilt her head a little bit more than the image, and I think I make the left eye still a little bit lower maybe than what she would have, but it doesn't really bother me. So I say that a lot. I'll make aesthetic changes subconsciously. It's only when they're really out of whack will I'll change, but I won't cite size or measure. If that's what you want to do, I'd say then that's great. But we're going for analytical drawing rather than kind of rigid photorealism. But I think the lightness is pretty solid. It's pretty there. So now blocking in a darker tone, you can see that core shadow, which acts as also cast shadow in there, being cast from the light source, which is high and to the left. You can see the highlight on her shoulder, the nose, and so that cast shadows to the right. So the ear is casting a little bit of shadow on the neck and also on the hair as well. And she's a little bit bulged up in the trapezius, the shoulder. A little bit bulkier there. But again, what additive subtractive can get you is a pretty far thoroughness in a very short amount of time with your drawing practice. We spent quite a bit of time when I was an undergrad student doing 15-minute additive subtractive drawings of figures. And you do a quick gesture in charcoal, and you'd throw down with your chamois just a quick tonal gesture on top of it, you wouldn't even worry that much about the negative space. It was kind of de facto in some of the gesture, and then you would quickly begin to do a few lines of contour and then get to some erasing with light, and in no time you had a pretty competent illusion of a figure in 15-20 minutes. So it helps speed up the process. Now, so you can see I'm working from the hair into the forehead, form shadow across the kind of ovoid form of her skull or cranium there, and then working in through the hair to begin to block that in a little bit darker. And I'll hit those darker areas or crevasses of hair where there's a little bit deeper part of the follicles of the grouping of the follicles of the hair to make that work stronger. So it's a fairly careful, deliberate stage, but it's not a final, finishing, detailed stage. And working down the hair of the side, and then there's also shadow from that hair onto the eye, onto the cheek there as well. And then down, getting the feel of how all those parts work together. You can see me delineating between the chin and where the shadow is and where the chin actually ends, and then the form shadow, cast shadow a little bit on the neck. They kind of come together, create a little form shadow and core shadow there too as well. That can be a complex little area. Again, you want to obey the laws of light, properties of light, and understand your shadows, when they need to be hard edged and when they need to be a softer edge to communicate form more clearly between hard edges, soft edges, and somewhere a little bit in between. But you'll know it's a cast shadow when it's got a harder, crisper edge to it. And it'll be a form shadow when it's softer, a softer edge to it. The eyebrow, cranial socket, and fitting into where that nose is. The top of the eye, lid in through here. And filling that lid and the lashes. There's no need to draw individual eyelashes. Maybe just a few flicks of the wrist right at the end, but not much there. Artists generally leave lashes alone unless you've got a real keen close-up view of the eye and eyelashes. So just getting a block in of the eye here. And again, ultimately, I'm going to take out what I draw here and change it because I feel like it's a little low, and I'm going to alter that just a little bit later. You'll see that a little bit later. But it's good to see where I make changes and talk through why I make them as well. That's just as, I think, just as important to see. So underneath the folds of the eyelids, there's 3 underneath there. And that part right in through there is the end of the eyeball as it folds into the socket, and you've got flesh over the top of that. Gives that little bit of a bulge in through here. And then we get back to the cheek. Kind of carving, sculpting, if you will, drawing the left side of the head and the cheekbone and back up. I constantly draw. You can see I look back, constantly draw, look at the image. Your eyes are certainly working hard here. So a little bit of an indivot in the top of the brow area. You can see where it's a little bit darker. And coming over to find that area. smooth that form shadow a little bit. And feeling my way through the right part of the cranium, the side plane, and you can see where the rest of the hair is going to be darker, and then ultimately finding the end of the brow there, which later on I'll erase through and get a little bit thinner later on. Take that and thin that out a little bit. The brow and the shadow kind of come together for now in the drawing, and of course they're separated a little bit by value differences in the image. So it's taking the time to learn to draw. Drawing is labor intensive, it's tedious, it's inherently fun, yes, but also vibrant and challenging, frustrating, difficult, and incredibly rewarding when you see things that you want to do, ideas that you have start to come together in many different variety of approaches or styles, and that can be quite fun. Now, writing through here, that just this line I bring down with the chin, that's really, I've got it too angled, and I'm going to have to go back and correct that later. So you can see where I make mistakes. It's too cut into the cheek and to the jaw. It's too much angled, and I'll have to widen her jaw out to meet what is her normative anatomy there. So I thin that out too much, and it makes it elongated, which I catch it later and I don't like. So it's all about catching those mistakes or what you might feel like, or proportional or diagonal angle changes in this case too as well. So it's just a matter of, again, going back to the labor, just taking and laboring, through time there. And that's why it's not a photograph. Part of the difference is the labor that goes into a drawing and a painting versus a photograph, which can be relatively, in terms of time, instant. Flash a nanosecond or whatever, a third of a second, whatever it takes to make the flash. Maybe if you're photographing something with a longer exposure, like the movement of a star or moon or light, on the moon or something of that nature, you may have a longer exposure. But generally speaking, you're going to find that photographs are very, very quick, and they generally tend to show that. So, drawing and painting, why, again, unless there's a real specific reason, I would question why you would want to try to recreate a photograph verbatim. You can let the photography do what the photography does, I think, too, as well. More of a philosophical kind of thing on that. So going back on the brow here, you just see me dig through the drawing. I'll clean up and clear up edges. I would say this is a very, medium kind of pass at this stage of development. You get different waves, if you will, or passes that go deeper. So again, drawing is from very general to very specific. And so we're still at a very general stage. Starting to get the tip of the nostril. So you can see where I grouped all that shadow together. And now I've got the opportunity to go back here and begin to make it separate and make it quite a bit more distinctive and specific. And that's what you want at these stages. In the beginning stages, it's all about blocking. I always think of how interesting the camera picks up a different color of the paper. I think the truer color of this paper is probably where I'm drawing at, but if you look at the image up to the right, it's a little bit of a deeper kind of sky blue, where what I'm drawing on is more of a sea foam with a slight green into it. It's interesting how the camera can read each different setting. I think I did this drawing in about 2 sittings. It's a 3-hour drawing, almost to the second, but I did it, I think, in two different days, just for time that I had to spend on it. And so the camera, stops and starts. So getting back to the nose here, you can see now picking through, no pun intended, drawing through the nose, the cavity here of the nostril, and getting the shape and also the anatomy of the side cartilage here to begin to read and to begin to separate from the cast shadow, that really distinctive cast shadow that's being thrust onto the cheek right in through there. And it's a cast shadow because it's light's hitting where the highlight is directly onto the bulb of the septal part of the nose hub there, and then casting onto the rest of the greater alar and lesser alar cartilage and onto the nostrils, and then over and out. It makes that shadow darker, so that highlight will be right in through there, and downward into the philtrum here. Well, it's about the time commitment to the craft of drawing and understanding anatomy. When you draw well enough in advanced levels to begin to put anatomy into your experience, that's when you want that. There are times when, quite frankly, you don't want to mess with anatomy, and that's when you're still learning to draw basic forms. It's a box. Boxes are more important to draw than bones, but later on when you master boxes, you'll want to draw bones and learn bones and muscles, and my anatomy series will help you do that. There's a little plug for that. But getting back to this, involving the eyeball now and the flesh around the socket, the brown lid, and the lid begins to come down to that tear duct. So we'll separate. She's got quite a bit of very long lashes with mascara, but it's more of a shape rather than each individual hair strand. You have to be careful. Maybe right at the end we'll get a few highlights where we see the highlights on the eye, but artists generally want to separate those into more shapes and value rather than specific, drawing every follicle, which can get you into deep trouble with drawing hair and any kind of facial hair, men's beards or mustaches, or women's hair or eyelashes. You want to take more of a shape approach. And then if you're looking for some serious photorealism, then you still want to do that, but then you take it to a level beyond that and you get into every other kind of follicle of hair or hair strand. So going now and finding the end of the pupil and iris and through here, darkening that a little bit, getting that eye a little bit smaller. Sometimes when you're doing a drawing, students will look at it like, well, it looks too big, where I had it before, but it was just grouping all of the shadows together rather than separating, so it made it look a little bit bigger. And then you go back and separate, and we can simplify and through our complexity and actually simplify our reading of it and make it clear, all that complexity. So I'm going to want to raise up the left eye in the image a little bit later. I think it's kind of sliding a little bit. It still is the finish, but it looks better than where it is now, because I've got her a little bit more head tilt than she had. And that means I'll have to adjust her right cheek and jaw at the end too. So here I'm just kind of getting a feel for where everything is located, double checking, and I know I've got some mistakes to definitely correct. Figuring out the ridge of the lid here, cast shadow on the eye, and she's got such strong eyelashes, they're so pronounced that makes that cast shadow on the cheek, that line I drew later on. We'll soften that out a little bit as we get that to fill in. That'll be darker in through there, that tone. But it's this pretty strong cast shadow. That's an eyelash, believe it or not. Very strong style with contemporary young women today with that type of mascara approach, which is attractive. So curving that cheek, it's like an egg form now, or a ball, working into the mouth area, sausagey in through here. And so you can see where I just blocked in the shadow shapes, and I've got later on a little bit of extra lip to draw. So we'll get some separation of cheekbone here. It's funny, I really don't notice the kind of indented part of her jaw that later on I'll actually go back and recorrect. It took me a while to actually see that. Get it to where I wanted it to be a little wider. You can compare it to the image above, where I'll put the ear gauge in, but the cheekbone needed to be the jaw and the cheek a little bit wider than where it is now. So some slight, believe it or not, changes to make it better than where it was, in my opinion. And since I'm doing drawing, I think my opinion probably has got to matter quite a bit. So we've got no structure separation between, decent amount of space between the nose and the eyes, the side plane of the nose, and where the socket ends, we've got some nasion, part of the nasal bony part of the cavity, and then there's space between the eyes proper. From eye to eye is about an eye width, so it looks pretty strong there. But I think her left eye slides down just a little bit for in my drawing. Just softly toning in the right side of the cheek, so you can see it come together. You mark the top of the lip, the full part of the lip, and through here. Curve that over. There's an underfold in there. It's a nice dive or nice angled shape to the flesh of the lip, which is thinner skinned overall. That's why we get more susceptible to more chapped lips, because we've got less skin there. And then the blood vessels show further through, so they have a reddish tone on most folks, or a darker tone on folks that are not Caucasian. We got African folks, it's a little bit darker, can be darker. And it's just less skin and more blood vessels, just relating to the type of skin tone that we have. We all are variations of that we have. So fleshing out the bottom lip and through here. Just know that they're, three-dimensional. I've got an anatomy video in the mouth, but they're very much like sausagey kinds of forms, with a 3 on the top generally and 2 on the bottom. It's kind of a classic 3-2, top 3, a center part, and then a bottom part, or left and right in the bottom part of 2. So just feeling their separation now, getting those all her lip forms to separate through what was the initial shadow. So kind of compare where I was earlier to what we have now. So we're in, you can tell where we're going for the finish, and look how much work is still left to be done. So we're about an hour and 14 minutes in, and the total time frame is about 3:20 or so. So about halfway there with the drawing itself. So you can kind of gauge and see, okay, that's about halfway into the drawing itself. So just getting these lips just to separate a little bit out further as we continue on with the sketch, the drawing, and through here, getting the bottom lip in here. So, as you are learning to draw and learning to put all these layers of information and concepts together, from action and gesture to volumetric figure to contour line and blocking, is that there are many opportunities along the way to kind of mess it up. And I think it's where you get your mileage in of drawing, is get your mess ups in. It's okay. It's okay to fail at a drawing. It's okay to make mistakes. I've got mistakes in this drawing. And quite frankly, you're going to do your best work when you've got some experience, and when you're off camera, even when I've got to talk through, etc. and so on. These are diagrams, and I enjoy doing them, but it's not nowhere near my best work. But it's educational kinds of things, and so there are opportunities to mess up and fail a little bit. It's okay. Allow yourself to do that if you can't get too frustrated. But you can also correct. And again, we're gonna show you when I make corrections later on. Just I'm digging through now the fingers and through here, kind of blending out some of the lines as I need to at times for changes and errors and corrections in through there. But allow yourself to the luxury of making mistakes, because it's really only through when we fail, it's your best teacher. It really is. But at times failing can get old, and so you want somebody to help you find what your tendencies are and help get that to a place where you have more successes than you do failures. Trust me, I understand that as well. So getting that drawing mileage in, the earlier the better. I've been drawing since I was about 4 or 5, and I'm 50 now, so about 46 years. All right, so still going through the head here and the fingers here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop here a little bit and fast forward the drawing about 10 or 15 minutes, so we can move forward in time, and you can see a little bit more development through there. Okay, so I fast forwarded a little bit, and what I'm going to do now is all I really did was I kind of tightened up the hand a little bit, so you didn't miss much. Now I don't like the eye. I talked about that earlier. I'm going to take the eye and change it a little bit, and alter that, bring it a little bit more into position, just slightly from where it is now. And so I'm going to alter that place through there. And let's get in close so you can see maybe a little bit of a closer view of what I'm doing. So there we go. So that gets you up a little tighter, so we can see that a little bit better. Laying in a bit more of just a little bit change on the eye and some of the nasion structure to closer to the eye. Just wasn't quite satisfied with what I'd had there. And so it's just no reason you can't change. And again, I just take what I had there before and take my chamois and just take it out. I didn't take the ruler, the eraser, and that's more drawing. Subtractively, just took the chamois so I could tone that out really quickly and to come back in with something that I could better utilize with the drawing, I think, to make the drawing a little bit better. Maybe make the eye a little bit. Bring it up a little bit, and then I'll make it a little bit smaller than what I had before. So let's see if that change works out for the better. Now working the lid, looking a little bit and including the eyelashes, but then now working the pupil iris area and being covered up by the top lid and actually a little bit of the bottom, just a touch too as well as it folds into. And then of course part of that eye is in shadow from her the bang or hair, a hair coming down and cascading over the cheek a little bit as well. And then the eyeball fold there. The eyeball ends just a little bit lower where you see a little bit of light there underneath where I'm drawing now, just to get to catch that a little bit further. And so I'm thinking about what I'm looking at, what I'm seeing, and what's specific to this model, but also what is important for anatomy and structure of the eye there to get that kind of roughed into where I need and want that eye to be, and that might be all enough in terms of where I want for that particular placement. All right, so I've jumped ahead just a little bit for the next day. I didn't do a whole lot anything different. I've just tightened up a little bit around the hands, etc. And now I'm moving in further, and then we're going to get closer to start really changing the ball game of this drawing for the better and making some more alterations where I think there need to be changes to the structure, etc. And starting with back now really with the hair, and then going into another deeper pass with the drawing and making getting close to a finished darker values where I need it, lighter where I need it, and also of course making some changes towards the relative end of the drawing to make that a final product of the drawing. So now working that bottom where it's cut a little bit or choppier, tighter. You can take the eraser and alter a little bit that edge of the head away from the background to give that a tighter edge and finish to that. And then starting to find through the I've still got the kneaded eraser, some of the lighter areas of the hair and strands. I just think of them as areas of shape, and I know we're on a curved head surface, kind of an egg form, and finding those light and dark shadow shapes, and kind of where there's a pocket of lighter area where the hair is, there's kind of a shadow in that where it's kind of violet and a little bit of a darker shadow, and then that opens up to more of that blonde tone there. And so we have that, and then just getting now much more specific with some of these forms. You can see again from the image, and then some of the errors where I have on the drawing, and then where the finish is going to wind up. So I thought it was good to have these three up the entire time of where it's going to end up at. And quite frankly, there's still, even in the finish, I've got the head a little tilted more than what's in the image, but it doesn't erode the final quality. I just got her with more of a head tilt. I generally tend to over gesture, and it's something that I generally want. So if something is more straight up, I'm probably going to give it more of a tilt. And I certainly did with this drawing. You can see in the finished image up above to the right, the little one, versus where she's actually posed. There's about a 5-degree more of a head tilt. But I think the likeness is particularly strong and accurate, and the values and edges work. So that's some what you can call artistic license. Now, if you're such a purist that there can be no changes, then I'm not sure that you probably want to take a sight sizing kind of class to make it so measured. Now I'm coming up here to the top of the hair. You can see where it's going to be finished, and I'm taking the the eraser here, the kneaded eraser, and beginning to erase back into the negative space of the background, but also the hair. And this gives, what I'm thinking here is I know that the hair ends, it doesn't end like a shell, like a complete hard edge, but it has a little bit of that kind of hair fuzzy sort of edge to it, which is kind of hard edged, and it's kind of not. How do you do that? Well, I'm showing you here where you can take those erasers and you can dig into the hair, dig into the background, and then come back with your additive components, and you can begin to sharpen and tighten up, and then really have that hair kind of look. And I give her actually more of it than the image does. Remember, you're the artist, you're doing the drawing. So if you want to stay particularly faithful to the image, that is your right, your prerogative to do so. And I took a little bit of liberty with some of the hair and gave her a little bit more of a follicle, I suppose, end to that as well. And it's my prerogative to make those changes. So I think this video, when you're talking about instruction, especially through a YouTube channel, which is a tough place, which is tough because you want to mentor. But it's particularly important for me to talk through all of those idiosyncratic changes that I'm trying to do as I draw, and then trying to tell you what I'm doing, or at least what I think I'm doing as well. So again, probably the biggest major problem with the drawing right now is the right cheek and jaw. It needs to be pushed wider, and so that's, and I don't mind the head tilt, but I don't have her cheek and jaw and enough of a head tilt, and so the jaw, especially underneath by the ear gauge on the right, needs to be wider. That jaw needs to be wider, and so that's going to come a little bit later. Took me a while to figure that out as to what I wanted to do, especially working flat. But it's a particularly nice surface to work on. I like the look of the toned Canson paper with the charcoal chamois. It gives you a monochrome drawing, which you get on white paper, but with a little bit of a tinted blue. And quite frankly, you can buy it any color, or you can actually tint papers yourself. You could do acrylic washes on paper and give it a specialized color, or multiple colors, or kind of a washy look, or whatever artistic license that you wanted to utilize and make it even more special. This is a very, very basic kind of academic sketch. It doesn't go very far in terms of exploration right now of more advanced techniques. It's still pretty fundamental and basic, but it's still relevant as well. All right, so now coming in, I've got a good place where I like a lot of the basic parts of the hair. Now I'm taking more of a hatched kind of approach, and I'm feeling now that it's time to get really tighter into the drawing. And so I'm taking my charcoal stick here and using it to begin to tighten and begin to give the next step along the way of getting slightly closer to a finished, relatively tight sketch with loose passages, I'll say. Certainly not a photoreal rendering. Well, a lot of times photorealists will, as they're doing their drawing, not even sketch out the composition gesturally. That it's more of a tracing that they'll do to get everything kind of photo accurate. Again, this technique, I've said it several times, is more from the Renaissance and the Baroque to Romanticism, Neoclassicism. That's important to denote, because I think a lot of folks out there and kiddos in YouTube land think that if it's not a photographically accurate rendering, it's not good. I'd say go look at Rembrandt, go look at Leonardo, Caravaggio, Titian, Tintoretto, especially Tiepolo, and Velasquez, and you might have a different opinion. But if that's what you want to do, then tracing is a great way to lay down the figure, because you don't have to think about the gestural lay-in and then adjusting and adding to, but it does stiffen up the drawing. That's the rub, is it stiffens up the drawing, makes it quite stiff, more like a photo, or at least possibly like a photo. So photos don't have to be stiff either. They can be beautiful, and they're as important to art as drawings are. So coming in now, defining. So you see I take great pains to go back over what I've done as the next step to rendering the drawings. Getting more of a feeling of refining the forehead, refining the smoothness of the forehead through stroking pattern and tone and hatching, and also through subtractive hatching as well. Getting some of that hair now a little bit more settled in. Once you've got the rhythm of the hair, and I get my bald hair out of the way, we can get to her beautiful figure and face and hair, and continue on. You've got more highlights in the hair, and it's all about edges, light, value, edges, and contrasts. And I'm getting more specific now with those shapes that turn into hair, which is settling on top of the form of her head. And that's what's happening now with the eraser. That's what makes subtractive drawing and additive such a, I think, kind of a natural, pleasing place to be for a lot of visual artists who are drawing centric, is that just you get the best of both worlds. You can carve into a drawing, and you can add on to a drawing with charcoal, and it brings alive the processes so nicely, rather than just additive, which you kind of have to draw around things. So defining the cheek and the bottom of the left jaw against the gauge of the ear, lightening up that area. Using the more blunted Japanese mono eraser as well. Look at that negative space coming through the head, the hair, the space in between the hair, the line, curving of the beauty of it's the shadow on the cheek rather than the hair is what's making that beautiful kind of curvy linear shape on her head. So it's cast shadows. And so now it kind of defining that cast shadow, separating it from that kind of middle grayish violet hair strand that we have there. And I'll jump around a little bit with the hair and defining all the liner patterns now. And by the way, while I'm defining the liner patterns, what else does that define? It defines the shadow patterns as well. So you're defining both light and shadow. You come down here and you can see that's particularly too thick down there by the eyebrow, that shadow. And so now it's a chance to continue just to whittle away and get that shape, where you want it. Get it to where it needs to be. A little bit thinned out. You can see, look it up at the final product of how much thinner I'll do that. So continue to reference the top right drawing against what I've got now and against the model, and you can see where the finish is going to be, and you can see where I wind up with a good likeness with some small errors or changes, which are totally livable. And I used to do that against other artists, and even artists like Velasquez or Rubens that did the same figure same person multiple times, and it would look you could tell that it was the same person, but it didn't quite. It's very different looking, and I think that's exactly what we do. We interpret every time, but it's always in the ballpark if you know who it is. But it's not a photograph. It's not an exact rendering, but it's an accurate interpretation. It gets to the spirit, and really to the great word that we want is the kind of the humanity of it all, of being, human. And so you can see how it's just a kind of a hatching technique of whittling away, subtracting away on the forehead, and taking the time to look at those now very specific areas of the anatomy, and in this case the forehead, and slowing it down and looking at these subtle shadow shapes within the cranial structure, the brow structure, and rendering them out very slowly. There's no different than on a more general macro level, but now we're on a smaller micro level where we can get in there and render out. And of course I keep it kind of loose and painterly. You could blend yours smoother if you'd like. That would take more time for the video, but it's certainly your look of how you want to finish it. That's what this is for, to either follow along and draw with if you'd like, and that's great if you are, or just watch and look and kind of flip through the video and watch the parts that you want. And you don't have to watch all of it if you don't want. And get some finishing technique ideas or lay-in ideas, or there's multiple ways you could actually use this video for sure. And then lightening that up by just erasing back into that little heavier part on the brow, that space, the nasion part between the eyes there, that downward trending part, just to loosen it up. It leaves you with a hatching kind of look and technique, where then she gets a little bit lighter where the nose attaches, the bone attaches, and you have skin on top of that. Into there's a little bit more of a lighter area. And now I can take my kneaded eraser, and it's a little bit blunter and softer, and soften that up by erasing over that and giving a little bit of a lighter touch to it. Dab at that a little bit and soften some of that further. I probably don't do too much more to that as I'm looking up at the finished drawing compared to what I've got here. So it's pretty close in some way. That forehead, the interpretation of the values and lighter and in the drawing, keeping that resolute. Going into the brow. And then getting up over into the space between the brow and the eye, which is really the beginning and the ending of the eye socket, into that area, and lightening that up a little bit too as well. It might be a little too light, or I might come back and it looks like I might leave it. And you can take the kneaded eraser and just gently lighten, give a little bit more reflective light if you want, in through her area between where the eye ends, where the eyelash ends, and the temporal area of the head. You can see, now take a look at her jawline in the image, and then look at mine. See the change I'm going to need to make. I'm surprised I hadn't discovered it. I might have already, but it's the angle is quite different, and it if you look at the finished drawing compared to where I have it and what I have right now, there's a big enough change. So you see it. It's really from the right cheek down to the jaw to where the earring is. There's enough of a change. I cut too much into it. And so that's worth, a big change. But the eyes are going to tighten up here in a minute as I work downwards, and then the nose, lips, etc. So you can see where the sketch is, I think it's a good place to see where the sketch is about, more than halfway finished, and then we get to, a final product. So now taking my Japanese model, the blunt one, and see how I use the triangle as a maul stick? And so I'm holding it down on the paper and it's raised up a little bit, and I can rest my arm, or in this case my palm and my right hand, on it and not smear the paper. And then get in there and start to dig out, literally dig out the charcoal of where I can want to tighten up her eye underneath the lid here of the eye as it moves across the drawing and into the, the shadow. Get a little yawny there, the shadow, and then bring out the white of the eye a little bit. So I'm just multiple ways of thinking. I'm reacting to what I see. I'm thinking about the eye being an eyeball, and I'm thinking about all the little shapes that make up the flat parts of a design. And so that's where we get light, value, edges, and the contrast, and how they contrast all together. And then bringing out that pupil and iris on the shadow side, substantially darker than the lighter side. But it's, you can see how white how dark a white of the eye is. I think it's where students make a mistake, is they blast it with light. That's just generally not the case. Most of the time, whites of the eyes are just a little bit different color, about the same value as our skin tone. Even for African models, they're about as light or dark as the light in their skin tone. So going into the tear duct, and you can see how, look at the shape starts to get tightened. Now here you want to analyze, look at the difference in the eyes and the finish already. There still need to be both finished, but it's getting tighter. So the edge quality of the right eye now, as I'm working into it, is doing what? It's beginning to get much tighter. So the contrast in edges is becoming greater, and therefore more clear to read as a finish, rather than the one that's really in a rough sketch stage to the left. And it probably goes without saying, but it's really good to make an issue out of it and talk about it, and that's what we're here to do, or I'm here to do with the drawing database, is to make it manageable for you to understand. Those of you that don't have can be in a school or have a regular instructor, you can have something of that through these videos to help you see things. So what was fascinating about when I was an undergrad, again, we had classes that were 8 hours long, and our professors would lecture part of that time for an hour, and then we would draw all day. In the second half of the class after lunch, they would actually draw or paint with us, along next to us, which can be, you think it might be really intimidating, and it never was. It was more about, how can they help you, because you were already good. It was a competitive art school at Art Center in Los Angeles, Pasadena. And so you already probably had more confidence than you should have had. But the point being is that it was really invigorating to watch your mentor sit next to you, or 2 rows down or whatever, and paint along with you. And then you could stop and come over and look at his or her work, and then they would actually stop for a while and come back and give you pointers, and then you'd have a critique at the end of the day. So it was really pretty fascinating. So that is the best way to be taught, is live with a live instructor. But I understand those of you that are in other parts of the globe, that is not a realistic possibility. So hopefully I can fit in the best possibly I can, for you. I really can't look at your work much anymore. I'm just so busy. Okay, so now getting back to the specifics, you can see where I'm tackling in the pupil and the iris, and it's hard to, the pupil is dilated, so it's a little larger, meaning, and there's barely visible the difference between the brown eye and the pupil as it's open and dilated, but it's in there, it's there. And so I'm tightening up strongly edges. There's the folds of the skin underneath the eye, which is important. And as we get down to the overhang of the the lid, and then the lash, strong, heavily mascara lash too as well, to give you that style. And you can see where that comes together. And you can see again where the problem of the cheekbone really, every time I look at that, when I take my hand away, I'm saying, okay, I need to change. I can see it now. I didn't see it earlier. So I think what I'm about to do, one of my favorite things to do, is always to put the highlights on the eye. Let's see if I'm doing that. And I do that by drawing through the highlight and then coming back and then subtractively taking it off. It's so much fun. So I'm taking a thin Japanese mono eraser and just dabbing at and taking out the eye. And I think I come back with a electric eraser in a moment to add to that. And then I take white chalk and then I give it that final pass. So if I just took white chalk and drew on the eye as it was, that white chalk is going to mix with the darker charcoal and it's going to make a smudgy, grayish tones, and it wasn't work as well. So that's a pretty good job right there, already getting the highlight. But we can make that better by making the shapes a little bit stronger, and so I'll do that in a little bit. So now I'm coming across the cheekbone with some hatching here to get that closer and tighter. So look at the difference now. Again, compare the eyes of the figure, and you can see how one is closer to a finish and one still has a lot of updates and changes to go within the drawing. So jumping back up to the brow area, nasion area, where the nose attaches to the brow, pretty high up. You notice how high up the bone is, and then there's a slant there about, I don't know, 20 or 30 degrees where her brow is. So it's a little bit darker between her eyebrows, and that's on everybody where it slants downward. That's to essentially protrude the sockets outward, and so the eyeball sinks in to your eye sockets, and so the sockets are kind of an outer shell along with the upper cheekbone to protect your eyes from damage. So you can see now as I'm just rendering through, I'm beginning to work over the entire image and hatch and cross hatch, keep it more in the spirit of a sketch and drawing and not blending it smooth and hours, and that's another different kind of technique. Working down this lower eye area into the hair and getting the shadow on the left part of the eye now a little bit more cleaned up and clear in between the pupil and iris, just the eyeball space. Really going back and tightening. You're going to see the difference between the intermediate stage of the drawing and a more final stage of the sketch. And that's kind of what this is about, is to show you how to handle that, or at least one way of many different methodologies, I suppose. And everybody will have a little bit different, kind of a stylistic look. And so again, with these drawings, the entire drawing database, I'm really less interested in style than I am more about good, strong beginning technique, especially in this more academic types of approaches, which can take you so far, and then either you stay with drawing academic and painting academically or traditionally, and if you're good enough to make a career out of it, then you could stay there, or others you can go on to explore many different ways of making art in the art world in different movements, and then maybe one day you create your own new art movement, which is probably the hardest thing to do in art, is to have something completely fresh and new and different. And generally that doesn't come until after a certain amount of time and studying art and being involved in and with art as well. So, now as I'm working the eye, I'm thinking, again, two-way shape and also three-dimensionality. So what are the shape of the shadows that I'm drawing, and then how does it conform to what I know about three-dimensionality, which is very important to have going on in your mind at all times to vacillate between the 2D part of the brain and drawing process, and then also the three-dimensional. We're all 3D and we're all volumetric figures, and then how do you get that to work on a very flat surface, two-dimensional roughly surface that we're drawing on. Even though it's really 3D, it still has a thickness. So but ultimately we're creating an illusion on that surface. Now you can see me come across the side plane of the nose and into the zygomatic area, and then now it's really getting specific, and the stroking pattern mimics the folds of the skin in a turn. It's probably my favorite part of the drawing, is when I get to really get in there and render hatching, which is probably my favorite kind of technique to use with drawing, more traditional way. So I'm probably gravitate more to kind of a Rembrandt way, of maybe Goya, Rembrandt kind of approach to drawing. It's a little bit looser and allows for slight changes or in scale and proportion. Maybe you might think of slight errors, but it's not important to be measurably 100% exact for me. Some of you that might be liberating for you. That might be the phrase that you need to actually say, wow, that's a bit freeing. As long as I have a good in the ballpark representation, that is plenty. And probably you'll want to do more than that. You want to get a nice strong likeness. But if you're really, I won't say you're anal retentive, but if you're very much a deep kind of perfectionist, sight sizing and measuring might be a better approach. But it can be very rigid and very stiff. Just take note of that. So working across the nose and the contouring of the nose, the bulb now, the tip of the nose, rounded and kind of also squarish at the same time, and then erasing out the areas of light. But also I'm doing more than that. I'm actually going back and specifying the shapes and clearing up the form and contouring and getting really specific with the edges of boundaries of the form, each particular different form. So it's going to look a lot clearer and cleaner and more resolute and more focused. And that's probably one of the bigger differences that you're going to see now, is just that next wave. And so you can see me make a kind of a contoured stroking path a little bit looser. Other artists might blend that out later, or even now they could smooth that out in their drawing if they wanted. So getting in here to the septal part of the nose, the split of the nostrils in through here, and just getting that shape even more cleaned up. Philtrum. And through there. So I'll kind of keep a little bit quieter if I can, and just let the camera roll a little bit, let you see the process. Notice I'll pick up the brush a little bit and just brush off any kind of erasing dust that I might have. Just be careful when you do. If you have one of those, when you do that, you don't want to push down too hard on it so it smears the material, and just lightly glaze over that. So see there where I took that shadow's heavy. Now I can take my mono eraser there and ease off on that shadow, and can still kind of cut into the charcoal and make it, the shadows also have a hatching or a crossed line look to it. So it's about that surface consistency, being consistent with your marks and your strokes. It's kind of like, it's almost like also like a pen technique. And I am holding the eraser as a pen now. Coming off that bulb, that tip, it's a little heavy there where that dark was, just a little bit. Taking off there, getting up into the nostril area where that fold underfolds into back into the cavity of the nose, back into the nasal cavity, which is pretty small. I kind of getting more specific with the upper lip area, what they call the Cupid's bow. It looks like a bow, the whole lip structure at the top, bow and arrow. You can imagine where the arrow would be shooting up to the eyes or the nose, and just carving into the philtrum and getting that cleaned up. See, I just gets so I'm clarifying the value, meaning I'm getting the value more accurate, edge is more accurate, and thus also the contrast, and then of course the overall effect of light. And again, you can see me push down have that triangle down there to keep my hands off the paper. So it's important. So now getting into the shadow now I can be more specific with the shadows. Now is the time to do that. We can lighten up in the shadow areas that we need a little bit more reflected light. Now you can start to see where we make, by erasing out into the shadow area, we can start to separate where the core shadow ends on her nostril, on her nose, the tip of her nose, and then turns down into the nostril. And then we can also shape the size of the nostril and reduce it and get it to reflect light back into that area of her head, the nostril area. It's all about just taking great care with the light value, especially now the edges in the contrast of those edges. So I'm going to let this just run for a good while without any narration. Then I'll come back a little bit just to let you just watch this and interdraw with it. So getting now back to a little bit of narration here, working at the mouth a little bit, we'll get closer to where we'll get to those teeth. I want to talk about teeth a little bit. And, I've got in the Anatomy for Artists series, I talk about teeth and what they are and their structure. But however, most of the time you're going to just indicate them rather than really draw them structurally and solidly. They really are kind of incised little triangular cubes that are shaved off, and then you get to the molars, they're really like blocks. But as we go in there, we want to just indicate the teeth and their value. And so they're very much in shadow inside the mouth, where the mouth is a cavity or a cave, and so everything in there is in shadow and darker. Not completely dark and not completely light. But you have to be mindful now of what's going on with the light, the value, and the edges, the contrast. So I'm getting now sensitively with the lips here. And you see they split in two at the bottom here, so two sausagey forms right roughly in the middle, and just getting that little divot there of the lip gives that elegant sort of separation. So they're kind of sausagey, puffy forms, and then they turn into kind of almost like spheres, kind of like the nose. And you can see delicate little highlights on the fleshier part where the lip is being lit by the light. At 45 degrees, you'll have that highlight. Remember, all highlights will happen at 45 degrees wherever your light source is from. And that's how highlights happen. And highlights can be lighter, or they can be more muted and slightly darker, and that depends on the color of what or the value in this case, rather, what you're drawing, but also the surface quality, meaning is it glossy, like kind of wet like eyeballs, or is it more matte and muted and flatter like skin tone? And the way to make flesh tone, both of all different ethnicities, a little glossier is to do what? Is to give it a wetter look. So fashion photography is always taking cue from that idea as well. So jumping in here on the mouth. So I raced ahead with narration. You can see where the eyes are pretty much finished. I would still say that the left eye is probably a little bit lower than what it needs to be, but again, I'm okay with it. So I've got her head tilted a little bit further. So I'm just working on the puffiness of those lips, and this is subtractive drawing. And I'm just trying to be mindful of where I'm erasing and the direction I'm erasing in, with a more curved surface that I've got to deal with. As I'm curving around, it's almost kind of like a worm, puffy, sausagey forms. So you just develop little vocabulary terms and ways to influence your thinking, so that whatever it takes to call it or name it, other than itself, you can say, okay, that's a cylinder, wormy, sausagey, pillowy form, and I know I need to make it puffy and full and fleshy, like this beautiful young model has here. All right, so, and then we'll get back now to the top of this lip, and as it arches, the mouth again is curved. In a frontal view, it looks like it's curved downward, and it is, but it's also stretched and curved back towards the head, and that's something that is difficult to show. You kind of have to be able to know that. It's like you're drawing, the whole thing is you're drawing on the top of a ball, and the nose is the most protruding aspect of the head, so that will need to begin to show and pop out further. Running around here and showing the roundness of those lips. Okay, let's indicate the teeth now. And so drawing the incisors here, there's a darker part of the corner. Well, I'll just indicate that. And you can see where the teeth get some reflected light, and so it's already about the value of the teeth what I have in the drawing already. And so just a little split there, just barely, not too hard of an edge. It's a lot softer edge than you think. We're just going to indicate those teeth, and we're not going to hard edge draw them. And then there's just tightening up the shape on the right side of the where we have the 4 sets of, I believe, incisors there, and then the little shadow between. That's all we need. We're almost there. It's a little bit darker in the edge where the lips come together, so we'll fill that in a little bit darker. It's very kind of soft, mid-tone to darker mid-tone value in there, and you don't need much really beyond that. You kind of have it. Getting little highlights in those lips. Alright, so I've jumped ahead in narration again, and you can see where I've really tightened up most of all, for me, the head and mouth, nose, chin, cheek area, and now I'm going back and starting to adjust on hands and shoulders and things. And the one big change I'm going to make later on is going to be that right cheek and jawbone. I'm going to widen that out a little bit later towards the another 15, maybe 20 minutes or so. So now what I want to do is, if you notice where I'm at, where I'm working right now with the background, and then where the drawing is as a finished study, I've still got a ways to go. So I'm working more background tone, and you want to be careful. You know, if you want to be truly faithful to the background tone that it's in the image, it's a medium gray, medium to light gray, and there's not a lot of modulation. It's a little bit dull, and that's okay for imagery to take. But I want to change that a little bit later, and you can see where I've added some darks and lights and just moving it around with mark making. And here I'm just sketching, I'm indicating impressionistically of some of the anatomy, the trapezius or the shoulder, and a little bit of the neck areas, just to get a rough indication of the sketch. I'll leave really this area looser in the drawing, and I'll go back and kind of reconfigure that. The palm area, it's a little wide there too, as well, I can tell. And so I'll indicate this in a very kind of Manet, Degas, impressionistic kind of way, and leave it loose and sketchy, and then leave obviously the face has gotten tighter for a 3-hour sketch. Obviously this could go a lot even finer, but I think, again, the purpose is to do long post sketching and not just these photographic representations, I think, which get kind of stiff excuse me, into the drawing. So a little bit of the throat area, Adam's apple, and then the gauge on the right. And then I'm about ready to add. This is the stage where I'll start to add some of the white charcoal of the drawing. And I generally, will add white charcoal at the end of a drawing and use it fairly sparingly, because it's really is only for the lightest, brightest areas for the most part, and everything else generally is taken care of without it. So compare, as I'm tweaking the drawing right now, compare it to the image. You can see where I'll add the white charcoal in the hair, some of the forehead and chin and ear, and maybe a little bit in touch in the hands, but especially in the highlights of the eyes, nose, and the lip, and a little bit in the chin area, to give it the pop it needs. Now, so I'm taking my electric eraser, and I've got my sharpener here, and it's just twirling around there. You can see it twirl, and I'm taking off a little bit and making it into a sharper point. And so now I can really come back into areas like this gauge, where there's highlights, and dig through that dark and make a little mark for a highlight. And same thing with the nose. Now really come through and get more specific with the nose highlight there. Bring it come together. And then later on I'll add white charcoal to make it even pop further. The white of the eye, the highlight of the eye and the glossy part of the eyeball on the pupil, and then also a little bit on the iris. Most eyeballs are going to have some kind of little reflective light going on. This has got double here, just a little bit of reflective on that end, and then a little bit of the eyelash area, just a touch. Just basically, these are just kind of like dots and symbols, and some are lighter and some are darker than others, and some have a harder edge, and you just have to be mindful of their shape. It's really kind of a flat, way of thinking about it. And just an ultra refinement to give the light that glossy, glassy look to it. Now coming down to the lip, and I can use that eraser to separate the lip seam there of the bottom lip. And so that electric eraser, you can't hear it because I'm narrating, so the sound was off drawing, but it's twirling around pretty fast. It's got a motor in it, so it twirls around. And I'm just taking some of the charcoal material off so I can add a highlight, and then work some of the areas to more specific conclusion. Then I'll take my sharpener, and then when I need to, it gets a little bit dull, we can take the tip like you can see there on the bottom and just twirl it around, get to a clean spot on the sharpener there. And that's a nitrum sharpener, by the way. The sandpaper pad's really nice. It's like a bigger paddle. They do a good job with those. And then up to the eye to get the highlight on the eye there. And there's a couple of dots and spots there on the bottom. Here and here. Little flicks of value. You know, if you were painting, you might load up your brush with a mixture of titanium white, maybe a little bit of slight color, maybe a blue or an orange or whatever it is the light source is, maybe a slight light green or something, and then flick it on there. Rembrandt would be very, very, very thick. Now I'm taking my white chalk, pastel white there, and sharpening it up on the nitrum sharpener, and then getting ready now to go in with a little bit of white to highlight area as well. So we'll take that and just keep a very light touch. This can run away from you really quickly if you're not careful. This is just white chalk, and then we're drawing areas where I want to bring out some of the lighter values to give it more emphasis, and just keeping a very light touch on the material itself there. And just paying mindful respect to the shapes that I'm drawing from the image to get those to work for me. And then a little bit on the earlobe of the gauge, pop that highlight a little bit more to make it glossy. It's kind of a rounded disc, and then pop in the highlight on the eye, make it a little bit stronger, and then just a little stroking pattern on the nose highlight, just to get it around, kind of a painterly mark. And then we'll work the lip here. Clean that up a little bit, run that around. Express that little bit of a seam divot. I love that. It's a nice look with this split. It's really, really pretty. And then she's got the chin now. We're gonna a little bit more hatching. So we want to stay stylistically more consistent to the drawing, and so I'll make a stroking pattern of the little split of or not the split, but the chin as it protrudes out, and then she's got a slight cleft chin, just slightly there. I can bring that out just a little bit with light. We go to the highlight of the right eye. You can see how I set that up with the triangle. Just fill that space in a little bit now that it's cleaned up, and give that the final touch. A light here, a little bit on the brow, the top of the eyelid, just a touch, just a little bit to emphasize. Not overdoing it will get you in trouble really quickly, and sometimes you just have to overdo it to see what I mean by that, and then you're like, okay, now I need to be really careful or more mindful of where I'm at with things. working that eye in. There we go. So, getting closer. And working the cheek tone here, and working the sliding part of her cheek, upper part to the nose, and getting it soft, a little softer, and let it just cascade and fall. And you can spend some quality time just tweaking out these areas. A fun time for the drawing is to see it really come together at the very end and pop. After all the hard work of the general construction of your drawing, it's like building a house. All that hard work with the foundation that nobody sees, and where it was at. So compare where we were, 2 hours ago to where we're at now. It's a more refined place for the sketch. It's nice to see. So I'll add some highlights up into the forehead a little bit, looks like here, coming up. Top of the nose, lighten that patch up a little bit. Catches that light. Just being mindful of the light dark patterns, really, essentially, and then trying to be logical about what the form is, and that helps me get the clarity and the roundness or the volume that I need in the drawing, because I can understand, okay, that's the skull, and this is the brow, and that's a little rounded here, and then divoted, and then wants to come up, so it's catching the light in that sense. What catches the light in one drawing might be shadow in the next part of the drawing. So it's all about again, each individual image has a different look and feel to it, which makes it exciting. A little bit of light on the Cupid's bow of the lip, and then where it cascades downward, that lovely curve, I'll catch a little light right in through there. Just don't want to overdo it. Lighten it up a little bit. And so I like letting the stroke of the hatch mark show. If you don't like that, then blend yours out. Let yours blend a little bit, and that's totally fine. So we'll go back and tweak some of the darks here underneath the gauge, the ear gauge, the lobe of the earring gauge. And then I'm gonna work this cheek, and then you can see where that jaw can you tell from the right cheekbone right by the eye downward to the end of the fingers, you can tell it's a little too far angled. So I'm going to clean that up and make some major erasing and changes, and there's no need to freak out about it. It's okay, it's easy to change. You want to be able to correct that early if you make the mistake, or not even make it, but you're going to make mistakes. We all do, and either you live with them, or if you can't live with them, you make the changes. So here I am. So you can tell now where I take the kneaded eraser. I need to widen this out. So I take my kneaded eraser, and just that widening already gives me a better likeness to her image. Gives me a little bit wider cheekbone. And then once I take that kneaded eraser, then I can find with my charcoal stick, I can find the edge again of where the bone ends down below, and mark it and give it a little bit of a stronger line and separation between the cheekbone. And then I can come back and then fill where that reflected light was a little too light, where I had to erase with the chamois, and come back and just fill it in. How easy was that? And curve it downward, work kind of a cross contour way to get that cheekbone to sit and be a little flatter, and then quite frankly be a little bit more angled, because I've got her on a slightly more of a tilt. And so because of that, we want to now be a little bit more accurate to that. So again, with that chamois, don't be afraid. Take a little bit more off as you need to get it as accurate as you can. Don't be afraid to make changes. It's one of the lessons I want you to learn of these long poses. I think every long pose that I've done, I wanted to show the changes that I made. There's no reason not to hide them, or to hide them actually. There's just to show what you have and show that we're not perfect and make changes. Most of my favorite Renaissance Baroque artists made several mistakes and sometimes did bad drawings. No big deal. It's beautiful to see the humanity in the process, and then to see things come alive with corrections and changes. Is kind of heartening to see that even your favorite masters, when they were alive and working, were still experimenting and exploring and making mistakes. So just make sure I get the wideness and the thickness of the jaw where I wanted it to be. It was important to me because I lived with that a long time in the drawing. So we're almost there, about a little bit less than 10 minutes left with the final drawing here. And just putting on the finishing touches a little bit, so the cheekbone I think is a little more reasonable now on that right side, and just kind of smoothing out and completing the core shadow a little bit. And I'll make changes slightly to the hand. The palm is a little thick underneath the pinky, and just tweaking out little edges here and there.